Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
The wind howled mercilessly as the waves crashed against the jagged rocks surrounding the isolated lighthouse on Gray Point Bluff. For decades, the lighthouse had stood sentinel over the treacherous coastline, warning ships away from the deadly cliffs below. But in recent years, locals whispered of something darker lurking within its walls, something far more terrifying than any storm or shipwreck. It began when a new keeper named Thomas arrived. He was a man drawn to solitude, hoping to escape the chaos of the city and the memories that haunted him. The townsfolk warned him about the lighthouse's history, tales of disappearances, strange lights, and eerie cries heard late at night. Thomas dismissed these stories as superstition, eager to prove his courage and resilience. The first few nights were uneventful, save for the constant roar of the sea and the biting cold. But then, on the fourth night, something changed. As Thomas climbed the spiral staircase to light the beacon, he noticed faint whispers echoing through the walls, barely audible like a breath against his ear. He stopped, listening closely, but the silence swallowed the voices as quickly as they came. The next morning, Thomas found deep scratches carved into the wooden floorboards near the base of the lighthouse. They looked fresh, as if made by something desperate to escape. He chalked it up to rats or some other wild animal and tried to shake off the unease. That evening, as the fog rolled in thick and suffocating, Thomas spotted a flickering light from the cliff's edge below. Curious, he ventured outside, the wind tugging at his coat. At the bottom, the rocks were slick and treacherous, but the light pulsed steadily. A lantern held by a figure standing motionless, staring out at the sea. Thomas called out, but the figure didn't move. He climbed down further, heart pounding, until he was close enough to see the face illuminated by the lantern's glow. It was a woman, her eyes wide and hollow, skin pale as death. She whispered, "Help me," before vanishing into the fog, leaving only the lantern behind. Shaken, Thomas took the lantern inside. That night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, twisting into grotesque shapes. When he shone his flashlight, nothing was there. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Over the following days, Thomas's sanity began to fray. He found journals hidden beneath the floorboards, belonging to previous keepers who had gone mad or disappeared. Their entries spoke of a curse tied to the lighthouse, a vengeful spirit trapped between worlds, feeding on loneliness and despair. One night, Thomas awoke to find the lantern glowing on its own, casting a sickly green light. The woman appeared again, reaching out with cold, trembling hands. "Set me free," she pleaded. But as he approached, the air grew icy and the walls seemed to close in. He realized the spirit wasn't trapped, it was waiting, hungry. Desperate, Thomas tried to escape, but the lighthouse door slammed shut, sealing him inside. The whispers turned to screams, the shadows to claws. As dawn broke, the townsfolk found the lighthouse dark and silent. Thomas was gone, vanished without a trace. Only the lantern remained, flickering softly, waiting for the next keeper to arrive and hear the call from the depths of Gray Point Bluff, a call no one can resist, but none return from.
Story number 2.
On a remote stretch of jagged coastline stood the Blackwell Lighthouse, abandoned for decades, but stubbornly refusing to disappear. Local fishermen whispered that it was cursed, a place where the sea's darkest secrets clung to the crumbling walls like mold. No one dared go near after sundown, except for a small group of thrill seekers, desperate for a story that would shock and chill. They arrived at twilight, the sky bruised purple and orange, the crashing waves thrumming like a heartbeat. The lighthouse loomed over them, its peeling white paint smeared with rust and salt. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting, revealing a narrow spiral staircase swallowed by shadows. As they ascended, an icy draft swept past, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent, like blood mingled with seawater. Inside, the air grew thick with an unsettling heaviness. The walls were smeared with scratches, as if desperate hands had clawed their way out of the stone. Half-faded messages were scrawled in red, their meanings lost to time. Among the graffiti, one phrase repeated again and again: "He watches, he waits." The friends exchanged uneasy glances, but curiosity pushed them onward. At the top, the lantern room was shattered, shards of glass glittering like fallen stars. They noticed a diary, water-stained and brittle, wedged beneath the rusted remains of the old light mechanism. The pages told a chilling tale of the lighthouse's last keeper, a man named Elias Blackwell. According to the diary, Elias had gone mad, haunted by a monstrous figure he called the Watcher, a shadowy presence that whispered secrets from beneath the waves, promising eternal vigilance in exchange for his soul. As night fell, the group's flashlights flickered and dimmed. One of them swore they heard footsteps pacing behind the walls, slow and deliberate, yet no one was there. A cold pressure pressed to their chests as if invisible hands were tightening a grip. Then from the ocean beyond came a faint, distorted melody, an eerie lullaby sung in a voice that wasn't human. Panic surged. They hurried down the stairs, but the spiral seemed endless, twisting unnaturally, trapping them in a labyrinth of darkness. The walls began to ooze black slime that pulsed with a heartbeat, and the whispers grew louder, urgent, desperate, pleading to be freed or warning them to leave. When they finally burst out into the fresh air, the lighthouse stood silent once more. But as they turned back to leave, one friend froze, eyes wide with terror. High in the broken lantern room, a pair of glowing eyes stared back at them, cold and hungry, before vanishing into the night. None of them spoke of what happened. But every so often, locals say, if you listen closely near the cliffs on a moonless night, you can still hear the lighthouse's mournful lullaby, calling new souls to watch, to wait, and to never leave.
Story number 3.
The old lighthouse stood alone on the jagged cliffs overlooking the restless sea, its weather-beaten walls whispering secrets carried by the salty wind. For decades it had been abandoned, its light extinguished, yet fishermen and travelers alike told hushed tales about strange happenings when the fog rolled in thick and heavy. Jacob, a documentary filmmaker hungry for a chilling story, arrived one autumn evening, determined to uncover the truth behind the lighthouse's dark reputation. Locals warned him to stay away, speaking of disappearances, eerie lights, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. But Jacob's curiosity was stronger than his caution. He set up his equipment just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky blood red. As night fell, the fog began to swallow the cliffs, curling around the lighthouse like ghostly fingers. Jacob entered through the creaking wooden door, flashlight slicing through decades of dust and decay. The air smelled of salt, rust, and something far fouler, like old sickness buried deep within the stone. He found the spiral staircase winding upward into darkness, each step groaning under his weight. Halfway up, his light caught a series of scratch marks on the walls, deep, desperate gouges, some fresh. The air grew colder, heavy with silence, so thick it pressed against his eardrums. Then the light at the top flickered on its own, a dull, sickly glow casting long shadows that twisted like fingers reaching for him. Jacob's heart hammered as a whisper crawled through the gloom, soft, pleading voices, calling out names he didn't know but somehow felt familiar. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. Panic rose in his chest, breath visible in the freezing air. The whispers grew louder, turning into mournful wails. Shapes began to materialize in the fog outside the windows, figures with hollow eyes and faces twisted in eternal anguish, trapped between worlds. Jacob tried the door, locked tight. He was trapped in the lighthouse with whatever haunted its walls. The light above began to pulse erratically, casting eerie patterns that seemed to dance across the room, warping reality. He realized the scratches were not just marks, but messages, warnings from those who never escaped. Desperately, he climbed higher, seeking the lantern room. The fog pressed in, thick and suffocating, muffling his screams. When he reached the top, the great glass panes were cracked, and beyond them the sea churned violently. There, in the heart of the storm, Jacob saw it, a shadowy figure standing on the rocks below, face obscured but unmistakably watching. The figure raised an arm slowly, beckoning him to join. The fog roared like a living thing, wrapping around Jacob's ankles, pulling, dragging him toward the shattered window. His last sight was the lighthouse beam flashing one final time, illuminating the storm's heart as the shadows closed in. Days later, fishermen found Jacob's camera washed up on the shore. The footage ended abruptly, the screen filled with static, and then a final chilling image, the lighthouse, its light burning bright in the dead of night, standing silent and waiting as the fog swallowed everything whole.